Today I want to talk to you about something that almost made me quit doing everything that God had called me to do. Not only do I want to share with you the specifics of what it was, but I want to talk to you about how to overcome that very thing. But before we get into the message, right now would be the perfect time to go ahead and like this video and subscribe to Reclaim Media on YouTube. We release weekly content that will build you not only as a leader, but as a believer. So what is the one thing that almost made me quit? It's actually very common. I believe most of us deal with this. The one thing that almost caused me to quit my ministry was comparison. Now, I grew up a pretty confident kid. I grew up kind of understanding who I was and having a strong sense of identity. But as I began to grow older, I began to deal with insecurities and comparisons. I began to match myself and to other people, other men of God, other leaders. And you know how it is. You would think like, man, I'm not like them. I'm never going to accomplish what they've accomplished. And this mindset began to attach itself to me even as I grew older. I continued to compare myself. But when me and my wife were running young adult ministry back about 5-6 years ago, I would compare myself to other leaders, other ministries. Even when we got out here to Texas to launch our church, comparison hit me very hard. Now, for those of you who may not know, my wife and I pastor a church out here in the city that's very close to Austin, Texas, called Reclaim Church. And we launched in 2019. And as we launched in that year, I remember being excited about everything that God was going to do. I remember having dreams and visions of what the church would look like and what our ministry could possibly become in the future. But even as I was looking to the good things of the ministry, there was still this sense of comparison as I was getting ready to launch. And it just so happened that our launch date was the exact same launch date as a much larger church that wasn't in the same city, but was pretty close to where we were launching. And I remember as we were preparing to launch, we would constantly look at what they were doing, how they were doing things. I remember our vision nights, we'd have, 5, 6, maybe 10 people. Their vision nights, they'd have over 100. And I remember looking at that and finding it so difficult to continue doing what God had called me to do as I was watching them succeed. And there's nothing wrong with what they were doing. There's nothing bad about their church. It really was a bad mindset that I had, and it hindered me from continuing to move forward in my ministry. And I remember constantly thinking about it, constantly comparing. Not only was I launching at the same time as a much larger church, I was also launching right aside our friends who were actually in Austin that had a much more established ministry than us. So again, everything we would do, I would look to what they did. I would look to how they were doing. And again, there's nothing wrong with being inspired, but if we're not careful, inspiration can turn into comparison very quickly. And I remember being in this season of my life, and as we were getting ready to launch, even as we launched, our launch date was great. It was a success. It was an amazing thing in my mind until I looked and saw what everybody else was doing. There's a quote by Pastor Craig Rochelle. He says this: "The fastest way to kill something special is to compare it to something else." And that's exactly what happened to me as we were launching the church. I began to compare immediately what our launch date looked like with somebody else's, what our ministry growth looked like with somebody else's, and comparison began to rob me. If we're not careful, comparison will rob us in our ministry, in whatever season you're in, whatever God has called you to do. Comparison is a thief. Comparison will rob you of your joy in your current season. It will cause you to forget about what God is doing with you and in your life and in your family because you're too busy looking at what God is doing with somebody else. Comparison will rob you of your focus. It will cause you to look at somebody else as they're doing their assignment, and it will make you get your eyes off of your assignment. It robs you of your focus. Comparison will rob you of your identity. I've seen this so many times, especially now that social media is so big. I've seen people compare to other ministries and begin to copy what that ministry is doing, hoping they'd get the results of that ministry if they were to compare and copy. Comparison will cause you to lose identity as you're trying to be like somebody else. God didn't call you to be like them. God called you to be who you are, to accomplish the assignment that He's given you, and to have joy in the season that you're in. Comparison is a thief. Comparison is like a roadblock on the way to your destiny. It causes you to slow down when it's not necessary to slow down. And even sometimes it'll cause you to quit when you shouldn't quit. And so as I was going through this season of comparison, it was very discouraging. I remember I was in my office and I'd be praying, God, I'm not the person for this. because Pastor so-and-so would do a better job. My friend that I know of, he would do a much better job than I would. God, you must call somebody else because I can't do it like they could do it. And that spirit, that attitude really discouraged me. It really slowed us down. And it almost caused me to quit. It almost caused me to say, you know what, I don't want to do this. I'm going to throw in the towel, find somebody else to do this because I'm not the right person for the job. So as I was in prayer about this attitude that I was feeling, this emotion that I was feeling, I began to ask the Lord, what do I need to do to overcome comparison? Because I know I wasn't called to quit, and I definitely wasn't called to compare. I was called to accomplish what God had placed in my life, where God had placed us as a family. We were called to plant a church. Now, I don't know what you're called to do, but today I want to give you an encouragement on how you can overcome comparison. Now, listen, it's not going to be easy, but I promise you, if you begin to practice these 3 things in your life, you're going to overcome the attitude and the spirit of comparison. So what are the 3 things that you can do to overcome comparison? I'm going to share them with you in just a minute. But before I do, right now would be the perfect time to go ahead and like this video, comment down below, and subscribe to Reclaim Media. Remember, we are releasing weekly teachings just like this that are going to equip you to be a better leader and a stronger believer. So what are those 3 things that you can do in your life to overcome comparison? Remember, they're not going to be easy. They're going to be difficult. But if you practice these 3 things, you're going to overcome comparison in your season. So I'm going to give you 3 C's to overcome comparison: celebration, contentment, and confidence. When I was in prayer about comparison and I began to ask the Lord, what do I need to do in order to overcome comparison? God began to speak to me and he said, you need to celebrate those you compare yourself with. The ones who make you feel insecure, you celebrate them. The ones who make you feel like they are your competition, you support them. The ones who make you feel like you're not a great speaker or not a great leader, you promote them. So I began to pray for the ministries that I felt like I was competing with. My friends that I felt like, man, they're much better than me. They're doing, I began to pray blessing over them, increase over them. I began to encourage them. I helped them in any way that I could with the ministry that they were a part of. The church that probably doesn't even know we exist, I began to pray for them and I began to pray that God would bless them financially with increase and workers and serve teams and all that. I began to celebrate when they would accomplish things. There was churches in the area that we began to support financially. Even though we weren't in a great place financially at the time, God put it in my heart to support the ones financially that I felt maybe there was a sense of insecurity and there was a sense of competition. So we began to celebrate, we supported, we prayed for. Number 1, you got to celebrate those who you compare yourself with. Don't let insecurity rob you of celebrating the ones that you're working with. Remember, as believers, we're not fighting each other. We're on the same team. Your success is my success. The other ministry that is doing what God has called them to do, their success is our success. I'm going to celebrate other ministries. I'm not going to compare, but I'm going to celebrate. Number 2 is contentment. Be content in your season. Be thankful for what God is doing in you right now. This was so vital to me when we began to launch our church, is that the Lord had me slow down in my mindset just a little bit from trying to be the best and trying to move so fast to say, son, just enjoy the moment. Some of you are trying so hard to be like somebody else that you're forgetting the moment that God has called you, and you're forgetting the beauty of what it is, the beauty of beginnings, the small beginnings. You know, I look back now, the vision nights that we had with 10 people, and I love those moments now. Now that I'm not worried about what so-and-so would say or comparing myself, I think about those moments and I remember them and I celebrate them. I'm content in what God was doing. I'm content in my life and what God is doing now. I may not be like the next ministry, I may not be like the next pastor, but that's not who I'm supposed to be. I am who God called me to be. And that goes into our last one, to overcome comparison. Be confident in who God has called you to be. Remember, you don't have to be like all those pastors around you. There's nothing wrong with them, but you're not called to be like them. You could be inspired by them, but don't compare and don't copy who they are. Let your ministry be what God called it to be. Stop trying to take everybody else's phrases and their own values. And yes, again, inspiration is one thing, but when we're stealing and robbing other people's revelation and trying to make them ours so that we can see the growth that we're going to have, we're never going to see it. Be confident in who God has called you to be. Be confident in the ministry that God has placed in your hand. And maybe instead of trying to copy and be like everybody else, go to the Lord and say, God, what is our identity as a ministry? God, what is my identity as a pastor or as a leader? God, who have you called me to be? And then walk in that confidence. The Bible says that he calls the foolish and the weak ones, and that's us. Anybody working in the kingdom of God is unqualified, is definitely underqualified for sure. And so when God calls you, be confident in that calling. So again, don't let comparison cause you to quit. 3 things to overcome. Celebrate those you compare yourself with. Be content in the season that you're in, and be confident in your identity and the purpose that Christ has placed over your life. Thank you again for watching. I pray this message encouraged you. I pray that today you're able to fight that comparison, be who God has called you to be. And don't forget, like this video right now. It not only will it help us grow as a channel, but it will help this video get out to other people so they can also be encouraged. Subscribe to Reclaim Media. We are releasing these types of teachings every single week. We are going to continue to build others up to be better leaders and stronger believers. Thank you again for watching. I'll see you next week.